All right, everybody, thank you for watching. My name is Matt. I'm here with Mario Fratto. He's running for U.S. Congress for the New York 24th Congressional District. So Mario, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me, man. This is great to do an interview here.
So first off, explain, I'm going to go all the way back down to basics. Explain what Congress is and what your job is and what the importance of this election is.
Well, what Congress is now and what it used to be is a little different, but the general concept is that Congress is the Senate, which every state has 2 senators, and then there's 100 of those, and then 435 people in the House of Representatives, and they're all considered Congress. So I'm running for the U.S. House to be a representative and not the Senate, but this is the lowest form of elected federal government to be a representative. So this is as close as the people get to the federal government is by electing somebody for the U.S. House to be a congressman. And that's why I'm running for it. I think it's important because we've gotten away from what even this position was. You know, when it first started, when the country was first formed, people would go to Congress for, say, 4 or 5 months, like January to April or May, and they were farmers and business people, merchants, and they'd go down there and make laws, you know, make federal law. That's all that it boils down to. And those laws that they make are supposed to be constitutional, that they don't take away any of your rights, they don't infringe upon anything in the Bill of Rights, and only do what's within their authority as provided by the Constitution. So now what Congress has turned into is instead of people going for 3 or 4 or 5 months and just having it be something they do for a couple years, they're going down there year round and they're getting paid 4 or 5 times what an average American makes, and they're staying there for 10, 20, and 30 years. So I believe in term limits, and I think you should go to Congress and pass laws that help the American people, not just go there to fight all the time, but actually do some work and get out of there. So whether you're there for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, you go and then you go back home and go back to your normal life. But I think it's really important that people vote and they pay attention to who their congressional representative is, because that's your voice at the federal level. And the U.S. Senator represents the whole state. So your congressman is the closest you get, and that's why it's important that it's somebody you relate to, that is from your area, that understands what you're going through, so they can be somebody to be your voice in D.C. and represent you.
So it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's really important.
So you're running under a America First conservative.
Yeah.
So can you break that down and explain what that is?
Yeah, so in the most simplest of terms, when somebody says America First, it means putting America before every other country and before all other priorities. Because what we've seen, especially from the Democrats, is they want us to worry about illegal aliens, refugees from other countries, wars going on in other countries, like in Ukraine now, where they want us to send our money there and get us involved, worrying about climate change in other countries, and not thinking about how that affects the American people and the country itself. So by putting into place policies that are better for Americans and not thinking so much about how it affects the rest of the world, that's what America First is. And to some people that sounds selfish. They say, well, you can't just worry about yourselves. But the thing is, that's how every other country operates. And if everybody does that, then that makes sense. It's just like your family. I use the analogy that when you're on an airplane, they warn you that if the oxygen mask comes down and falls from the top, put on your mask before you help others, because you can't help anybody if you're passing out. And that's how it is. If we're going to help other countries, we better take care of America first, because if we're struggling, we're not any use to anybody else. So I think it's important that, if you're a U.S. representative for this district, then you better be worrying about your people, just like it's your own family. Don't bring dinner over to the neighbors if your kids are starving. And it has to be. And as far as being a conservative, that means actually supporting traditional values, supporting what got us to this place to be the greatest country in the world, and trying to preserve that and actually be looking out for the future by not moving too far ahead. And what's happening now is the opposite of conservative is a liberal, or what they call themselves as a progressive. And what they're doing is, in the name of progress, they're putting forward policies that really are taking us to a totally different place than where we should be, with this whole transgender thing, or you can use which bathrooms, you can play in sports, you can do that, or you can marry a horse, or you can do whatever. And they say, well, that's considered being progressive. But being a conservative is saying that stuff's pretty foolish, and we should just take care of what we got because we actually are pretty lucky to be in this country.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that. So, hitting the next topic would be, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of things that have happened that would kind of defy or go against the U.S. Constitution. So, what is the importance of the U.S. Constitution and its current role in our current government?
Well, look, it's the most important government document ever made by far is the U.S. Constitution, and other countries that have formed since the United States have tried to emulate that, and their Constitution is very similar, and it's because of how perfect of a document it is. And there's two ways to look at the Constitution. One is that they call it a living document, and they say that it changes according to the times you're in, and it means something else. And the other is to be a constitutionalist, a textualist, kind of like Justice Scalia was on the Supreme Court, where when he interpreted the Constitution, he tried to find its meaning, what it actually meant at the time, and put it into plain words as it is into law. So, in other words, if it says, the Second Amendment says, shall not be infringed, that's easy, you don't infringe upon it. But they say, well, they didn't know we were going to have these types of guns, and they didn't know that there would be this and that, so now we have to change what it means, and you can infringe upon it a little bit. And using that logic, nothing means what it actually says anymore. And I think the biggest point of the Constitution is that it's a limiting document. So rather than people view the Constitution as giving the government power, I view it as, and I think a lot of conservatives do, as saying the only things you can do, the only things the government can do is this, and that's it. And everything else belongs to the people, that it's reserved to the people. That's an amendment in the Constitution that says that the states or the people, which is one and the same. So the closer you get to a local government, the better. You'd rather have your mayor and your city government controlling your life more than the federal government. So the federal government should do very little, only what's in their power to do. They can print money, they can raise an army. That's to protect the general welfare of the people, but not what the government's doing now. So if you actually stick to the Constitution, the government would probably be a quarter of the size that it is right now.
Awesome, thanks for clarifying that. So just so you guys know what we're doing, we're going to break down some topics on the cards that, so basically when anybody runs for office, it's kind of the norm to take and put your for and against, and you got a lot of information to cover in a short amount of time, or say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, here we go. So we're going to take that and just kind of group some of these topics together and break it down so it turns a two-word for or against into more of a paragraph. So capitalism, small business, and farming. That's three things that are extremely important in our district and in upstate New York. Can you elaborate on that a little bit and the importance of that? Yeah,
so capitalism, basically letting the free market go and letting the marketplace decide. It's kind of like, look, you can regulate, right? You can say that now there's a law that every car that's built has to have a seatbelt, right? And if you totally let capitalism go wild, you would say that they don't have to have a seatbelt. We'll let the market decide. And if people want to buy cars without seatbelts, they can, right? But now that there's a law that you have to wear one, it would be worthless to have a car that doesn't have one, right? But let's say there was no seatbelt law. If people really believe seatbelts are the way to go, they're not going to buy cars made without them. So the market will determine, hey, this is the car you buy. Just like now, if there were planes that they said didn't have certain safety regulations and didn't have certain things, the airline probably would just go out of business, because if all the other airlines started having these safety regulations, people would say, I'm just not going to fly on there. So, but if you let capitalism go totally free, that other dangerous airline, let's say, would still be able to exist. But there would be people that say, well, they have a right to be in business, and if people want to take that risk as an free individual, they can say, hey, I'll spend half the money on the ticket and fly with them. But if there's not enough people that think that way, the airline's going out of business, right? So I believe in capitalism. I think that's why the country got here, into the place we're at now. But I also believe that there is some common sense. You know, now what you see would say like Google and Facebook and big tech, people like Teddy Roosevelt. He was a Republican, but he was known for the trust busting and putting in antitrust laws and breaking up monopolies. And even though I consider myself a conservative and a capitalist and I support free markets, I think there is a point where you can break up these businesses and say this is dangerous, that Google and Facebook and Twitter, they have too much influence on us, they influence elections, they're involved in everybody's life. So maybe you take a step back and say that there actually is an interest for the people in seeing these companies break up and give more small businesses. Because now you see these mom and pop shops closing down, and it's just Walmart and it's just mass chains because the small businesses can't afford the regulations and to compete. You know, and you see that in the sense of, I use an example of a pizza shop. If a pizza shop opens up on the corner and they're selling slices of pizza for $2 and they're the only person there, people buy them. But if a guy or a big corporation like Domino's or Pizza Hut comes in, they could open up right next door and sell all their slice of pizza for 50 cents or $1, and they could be losing money, but they have so much money, they do it just to drive the other guy out. And now once the little place closes that was selling them for $2, they can make their prices $3. And now you're paying more, but they're the only game in town because they could afford to take those losses. So a lot of these small businesses can't do that. You know, that's why if you go to a little convenience store, the gas is a little more expensive. It's like a family-run mini mart compared to a 7-Eleven or whatever, and all the prices on the shelves they're a little higher because they can't afford it, and they have to pay all this tax and regulation. So the government as it is now, there's so many departments that say you have to comply with this environmental regulation, you have to comply with these filing things, the IRS is putting all this weight and pressure on these small businesses that they can't afford to compete anymore. So people are having such a hard time starting a business and then keeping a business going that was successful for generations. Now they can't keep up. So I think it's really important that we look out for small businesses and help them compete, because otherwise it's just like the government is now. It gets so big, these businesses get so big that they're the only game in town and you count on them for everything. And if they go down or if they raise their prices, whatever, you're beholden to whatever they want you to be. And I think that's dangerous. And as far as farming goes, that makes up a ton of this district. It's an agricultural district, and farming ties into a lot of things. Inflation's crushing farmers. There's fertilizer that they're paying double and triple for now, which directly affects us by the price of our food, because the farmers are having to pay for that. And they also have a very hard time finding employees. That's why we see a lot of farms having to use illegal labor and cheaper labor, because they say Americans won't do those jobs. And that's something we need to address, because they need a workforce. But at the same time, we don't want to reward people who basically break into the country and then stay here. And then we say, oh, well, since you've been breaking the law for 5 years, you can stay. But if you've only been breaking the law for 3 years, you got to go home. You know, because this guy was able to stay under the radar longer. So you reward him for that. And that's dangerous. But at the same time, if the farmers can't get the visas that they need to get the employees that they need, then our food costs are going to go up, you know. And a lot of these small farms are going to go out of business because of the big farms that are massive, that can, like I said before with that pizza example, they can sustain times where they're losing money because they've made so much. But somebody who's basically, a lot of these smaller farms, they sell a lot of their crop right at the beginning of the year, and they don't know what the prices are going to be, but they promise it. So a lot of corn farmers sell it to an ethanol plant that turn the corn into ethanol. Right. And they might say, okay, it's $6 a bushel for all my corn, and it's already promised to that plant. But then the fertilizer costs skyrocket. The end of the year comes and everyone else is selling their corn for $8 or $9, and that guy agreed to $6. But he had no choice because he needs to make sure. So there's a lot of complex issues, but I think the best way to deal with the farming is by talking with the farmers and seeing what they want to do, because most of us that aren't involved don't understand that world.
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely would, better than me. I'm in the small business world, so in the, just to clarify that, would you say that overregulation is kind of the natural suppressor for keeping people from starting a business or being able to grow a business, and that overregulation is just running up costs and, whether it be insurance or materials or labor or however it may be, is that kind of that general category that would be something to label as a...
Right, if you want to just put another garage, another bay into your garage, you probably need permits, you need to go talk to somebody with the town, they need to look at it, you need to submit a plan, you need to go through so many hoops that a lot of people just say, oh, I'll just use what I got because it's too difficult to go through all these hurdles just to expand my business.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for clarifying on that one. So the next one's gun rights. This is a big one.
Yeah.
Gun rights and restrictions. I know there's a lot of layers to this, but can you
on the most basic level, the Second Amendment, number one, it's second for a reason. That you have the First Amendment, which is your freedom of speech, religion, press, protest to government, peacefully assemble. But the speech and the gun rights go hand in hand. That's why it's the Second Amendment to me, because if you can't speak out, you can't have your Second Amendment, right? So if you don't have your first, you can't have the second. Right. And this, likewise, if they disarm the population and they tell you have free speech, but you can't protect yourself, then they can take away your speech too, because they know you're unarmed and they can say, hey, if we hear you say this again, or you post this on Facebook, or you do that, where now if you have your Second Amendment, you're able to defend yourself and your government and your freedom from tyranny. I mean, that's why it was there. Without citizens being able to be armed, we wouldn't have a country. They were able to make their own army. And I think that you need constitutional carry, which just means you can carry a gun across any state line. If you legally do it, it should be a federal right. And that they're giving that power too much to the states, and it's clearly laid out in the Constitution. The Second Amendment shall not be infringed. And that's your only constitutional right that changes drastically from one state to the next. So if they just say you can carry in New York, Florida, Pennsylvania, constitutional carry across the board, and that would solve the problem we have now.
Seems very simple.
It is, and it really is, and it's very obvious that this is one of the very few things that the federal government is allowed to get involved in, and they should just step in and say, you states are stepping on people's rights. In New York, saying you have to micro-stamp this, that you can only have 7 rounds in a magazine, that you can only own this weapon, that you got to be this age for that weapon. That's not a meaningful right anymore, especially if it changes from one state to the next.
Yeah, that's true. So over the last couple of years, there's been definitely some challenges for police and military, going all the way back from before what we were dealing with a couple of years ago up until now, but especially over the last 2 years. Can you bring up a couple challenges that you see and a good way to face those?
Yeah, I think,
importance of it, right?
Well, so police have been made out over the past few years, at least in the mainstream media, to be the enemy. That's the constant narrative, that the cops are out to hurt people, that they're racist, that they're abusing their power. And look, there's always going to be a bad apple in every group. I don't care whether it's mechanics, I don't care if it's painters, I don't care if it's firefighters. There's always going to be somebody that's bad somewhere. But what they do is they find the 1 or 2 or 3 in the whole country that do something really wrong, and then they push that narrative to say this is all police officers. Similar to what they do now to say, if somebody's white, with the whole critical race theory and stuff, well then your family must have owned slaves and now you're bad, based on what a minority of people did hundreds of years ago. So they're doing that to police now, and we need more police in today's society, and we have to hold them accountable, but at the same time we can't be defunding them and making communities less safe, and that's this whole movement. So what I say is any community that votes, so whether it's the city of Oswego says we're going to cut our city police budget in half, we're going to have half the officers we had, fewer officers on the streets, I would say, okay, well then the city of Oswego receives no federal funds for anything. So any programs we have, anything we do for other cities, you don't get it anymore. And then they'd say, well, wait a minute, we're not going to actually cut that budget, and we want those programs. So since we have that power, we should use it and tell them we're not going to let you turn your community into a mess, and then you won't need federal funds to clean it up. Just take care of your police. And with the military, I think that they're, a perfect example. I haven't brought up my opponent yet in this race, but Claudia Tenney, she voted for taxpayer-funded sex change operations in the U.S. military, which means any member of the military can say the next day I'm a man or a woman, and we have to pay for it with taxpayer money, with the Department of Defense funds. And that hurts the people in the military because, number one, those people can't serve if they're getting a sex change operation and they're laid up for 6 months or a year, so they're not protecting the other troops. And number two, you're taking hundreds of thousands of dollars for these operations that could be used for combat equipment, for guns, for body armor, night vision, whatever they need, and they're not getting it. And just medical care for veterans, for everything. So it's a slap in the face. But I think our military, people have lost respect for them too on the left. That they're viewing them as going in and colonizing places and saying that we're pushing our values on people. And look, some of these wars didn't need to happen in hindsight, but it's not the fault of the military and the soldiers. They're taking orders. It starts from the top and it goes down. So if you want to blame somebody for the Iraq War, you have to blame George Bush. He's the commander-in-chief, and Congress votes for that. That's another thing Congress does. They have the power to declare war. It's one of the few powers that they do have, and that's one of them. But you can't blame the troops. They signed up to do the right thing, and they deserve respect. So police, military, firefighters, first responders, those are jobs now that people don't want to do. You see cops out on the street and somebody goes right up to the window and shoots them. I saw that out in California, just sitting in their car. You talk about a target on your back. So we need people that want to join now, and they're getting discouraged saying, I don't get respect if I'm a cop. If anything, people are going to try to hurt me. And we just saw it out in Rochester. We had a cop killed out there by somebody just ambushing them. So it's terrible, and we need to bring back respect for military and law enforcement.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do on that one. So next topic would be energy independence.
So that's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we're in the situation we're in now with the gas prices, is that we're stopping drilling, we're stopping pipelines, we're stopping a lot of energy production that we were doing at home. And now you have Joe Biden going overseas, begging countries that hate us, like Saudi Arabia and these other countries, to produce more oil to sell it to us when we could make it ourselves. And in the United States right now, we have about 300 to 400 years worth of coal that could power the country for hundreds, literally longer than we've been in existence.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and instead, they're telling us we need everything to be electric, solar, wind, battery and wind and solar, and all of that stuff is made in coal factories, coal-powered facilities in China. And it just makes no sense because we're allowing them to get rich. They're pumping all this smoke into the sky and then saying, here's your battery for your electric vehicle so you guys don't pollute, but we'll pollute to make it. Right. And then they have these electric vehicles that they plug into a building that's powered by a coal plant, and they're charging the battery from coal. And the whole thing doesn't make any sense. But what makes sense is to give us coal is so cheap that, I talk to people that live throughout the district. They say, if we have a stove and a coal fire down in the basement and we use that, it's costing me like $80-90 a month to heat my house, and we can keep it 75 all winter if we want because it costs nothing. But what they're doing now with these fuel prices, people's heating fuel that they're using for their homes out here are cost $7-8 a gallon. It was getting up to for that, and they said their bill was like $1,300 a month. It was more than their mortgage and their taxes and everything for that oil, when if they would just let us say, hey, you can use coal for everything you can do. Right. But the regulation, and now they want to go even further and say, homes need to be all fully electric with everything and need to be redesigned within the next 10 years, and they're pushing all this stuff that they're making us go broke to go woke. And that's why we keep saying get woke, go broke, because you want to use solar and wind, and it's cost more than the energy we have right at our fingertips. And they love that gas prices are hitting $7 and $8 someplace, going crazy, because then they say, see, this is why we need these electric vehicles.
And they can bury the alleged facts behind a curtain.
Exactly. So. And they feel, it's the same thing with the people who say, I'm all about going green, and then they fly in private jets, and they do all the stuff that causes more pollution than 100 people in their lifetime. Yeah. But they say they drive a Prius.
Right. Yeah. There's a double standard there.
Yeah.
Places. This one's probably pretty quick, but voter ID.
It doesn't make any sense that you can walk into a gas station and you can't get, tobacco product. You can't get a packet of, you can't get chew, you can't get cigarettes, you can't get anything without showing ID. They made it in New York City, you couldn't get a cheeseburger without showing a vaccine passport. Right? All these things that should be, I mean, honestly, they shouldn't really be even enforcing these the way they are. They're IDing people 60 years old to buy a beer, they're going over the top. You can't do any of that, but you can go vote and control who runs the entire country or the state or your city or community without showing anything. And then they just say, what's your name? And then you go scribble in a book and they say, oh, that looks good enough. And that's it. And then you're good to go. So that's crazy. There needs to be voter ID. That should be one of the only things that you have to show ID for. And they make sure that you don't. And if they really cared about secure elections, they would do it. But what they want is to be able to have somebody's, dead great-grandfather vote 3 times. That's the world we're in, where there's literally some places there's more. Yeah, no, it's true. It's like, we saw a kid the other day and he said, can I vote for you? And he was like 7 years old.
Right.
And I said, well, if I was a Democrat, they'd probably let you, but not for me.
Right. So the situation at the Mexican border, so what's happening currently and has been happening for a while versus proper immigration. Can you touch on that?
Look, we're incentivizing this by how people get treated. So, I believe it was in the state of Kansas, if you were, say, from Oklahoma or Texas or somewhere nearby and you were out of state, you went to college there, you pay out-of-state tuition. But if you were an illegal alien, you're not a legal U.S. citizen, and have no business being in the country, you got to pay the in-state tuition rate. Which is just like, you're actually treating somebody who's here illegally better than U.S. citizens who pay taxes and built the country. So of course people would say, I better get over to the U.S. with my family because we could get an education better there and it'll be easier for us than it is for Americans. Or if I get there, Claudia Tenney supported this Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which said anybody who's an agricultural worker, if you've worked on a farm for 6 months within the last 2 years, 1,000 hours, so basically a quarter of the time you've been here, you're now legal, your kids are legal, your wife's legal. What's going to stop other people from saying, well, let me get over there, because if I can just say I've been working on a farm for 6 months, now we can stay here forever and we'll end up getting citizenship. So you need to disincentivize first with these programs, and then you need to secure the border, because it's not only that you're hurting Americans who have been here, who paid their taxes, who are looking for jobs, because they can't compete with somebody who says I'll do the job for $3 or $4 an hour under the table. They're not going to be able to do that. They can't afford it. And you're hurting the country as a whole because it's less safe. Because it's not just people coming across that border, there's drugs, and some of the people, they're not just poor Mexicans or Guatemalans or from Central America, but it's anybody who could get into Mexico. Yeah. So you have people that are in ISIS and Middle Eastern terrorist groups that can get into Central or South America, and then they can literally walk over the border or ride in the back of a truck or whatever they're doing. Right. But that's putting us all at risk. And to pretend that everybody that crosses the border is just a good person that wants to take care of their family is crazy. Yeah. And not to say that even the majority aren't, that they're just people that want to help their family, but there are people who are rapists, there are people who are murderers, there are people who are bringing drugs and other things across, and it's a shame. I saw a case a few years ago, probably even more than that now, maybe 10, but I remember it was on the O'Reilly factor. Bill O'Reilly's arguing with Geraldo Rivera, and I believe it was a 4-year-old girl and her family got in an accident, and the little girl got killed, and they were hit by a drunk driver who was illegal. And O'Reilly was saying, well, the guy just shouldn't have been here to do that. And Geraldo's arguing with him, saying, well, this isn't an illegal immigration problem, this is a drinking and driving problem. He was like, Polish people drink, Irish drink, it's everybody, it's not just. And O'Reilly just got really irritated. It's an entertaining clip, but it's really sad. But he just keeps saying he didn't have a right to be here, he didn't have a right to be here. And that's the point, that we already have enough problems. We have American people that are out doing things, people are getting killed, people are getting robbed from our own citizens. But why would we let in more people? It's a shame when somebody is getting killed, a little girl or anybody. And then we say, oh, it was somebody who wasn't even supposed to be here. You know, and that's the point. So we have enough of our own problems, and that goes back to America first. Secure your border. Don't vote with the Democrats in AOC like Claudia Tenney and say, hey, you're all legal now. Right. Because that's going to encourage more of it.
All right, so next topic is parental rights and school curriculum. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that right now the government has way too much control over students' education. One of my huge things that I'm running on is we need to abolish the federal Department of Education. People don't realize it started in 1979 under Jimmy Carter, and what they use it for is to influence the curriculum. So if schools are teaching this, you know, woke stuff, the critical race theory, you know, teaching people that the lighter your skin is, the worse you are, and the darker your skin is, the better you are, literally lining kids up against the wall and rating them. Well, maybe they get a little more federal money than another school, and they use this stuff to influence it. But bottom line is parents need to be able to have the most influence on their children's lives and their education. And the way the school administration is now is they were calling parents terrorists for showing up to like school board meetings and complaining about forcing this stuff on kids, where they say, oh, you're not going to read the prince and the princess story anymore. It's two princes, and if they don't read that, then it's homophobic, you know, or whatever else. And parents are sick of that, so they're waking up all over, and they need to have a say in what their kids are learning, because they're getting taught that we're not the best country, that they're getting basically taught to hate America instead of love it, and telling them take God out of the pledge, take God out of school. You know, parents are sick of that, and school choice is something huge, and I think that the money should follow the student, that when families pay school tax, that they can use that money to send their kids where they want. Like my school district in Geneva, $61 million, which comes out for the budget, comes out to $28,000 per student. The Catholic school is $7,000 a year. So it's 4 times the money the public school spending, and they're getting a worse education than the Catholic school. So that means they're wasting a lot of money. And if the parents could spend it somewhere else better, then they should be able to. And get all this woke, trans, critical race theory stuff out and send them to a school where they'll learn history and math and reading, how to balance a checkbook, you know?
Next topic is dependence on China and other countries for energy, manufacturing, and
that
everything, right?
Ties into so much, but one of my big things is ending our dependence on China. And I like to point out the fact that, you know, my grandfather fought in the Korean War. They said, we'll stop the spread of communism. We're dealing with North and South Korea. The Chinese were helping the North at the time. We go to Vietnam, 58,000 plus dead Americans. Same thing, civil war, North and South, third world countries, saying we need to stop the spread of communism. Can't trade with Cuba, can't buy Cuban cigars because they're a little communist country. Yet the entire time we've been building up China. Largest trading partner is the US. 25% of all their trade is with us, the most powerful communist country in the world. And we've turned them into basically on the level with us with their economy for the past 50 years. And it's for money. So I think we've been sold out. I think it's these politicians that work for lobbyists who work for big corporations that want to be able to go over to China, use the cheap labor, and then sell us all the products back to us that we used to make right here. And now all the stuff they're pushing, whether it's, let's say, solar and electric vehicles, the solar panels are made in China, the batteries for the electric vehicles are made in China, and they're polluting the planet to make this stuff, and then we depend on them. And then we also depend on them for prescription drugs. You know, when the whole COVID pandemic started, it started in China, comes here, and then we need to buy masks from China, antibiotics from China, everything from them. They made out like bandits, and we're begging them to send us stuff to help us. And I think that any drug that is on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicine needs to be made in the United States. So at least our health isn't dependent on China. And we just need to wean ourselves off. We need to slowly try to bring those jobs back. We need to start making everything, start in the list of importance and work our way down. And if the government's going to encourage programs and invest in things, which is unfortunately what the government does now, they pick winners and losers and try to get involved, then help companies that are willing to leave China to come back here to make those products here. And if we can do that, I think we'll be a lot safer, because right now, if China cut us off tomorrow, the country collapses. We're in debt to China. So that's a national security risk. And if you see what's happening in Ukraine, they're telling us, oh, we won't deal with Russia because they're invading Ukraine. Right. But if China invades Taiwan tomorrow, we won't cut China off. We won't say a word. We can't.
Not even that.
Right. No, we'd collapse.
But so there's a strong importance on being able to bring back American manufacturing and
right. You would bring back jobs, and even if the products were more expensive for a while, at least we'd be helping Americans by doing it. But all that money's going over there to these corporations. We never see any of the tax money. Nothing comes back to us, and it's helping China. Yeah. So if we could build our country back up and stop building up the most powerful communist country in the world.
Yeah, I agree. So next topic is political correctness, censorship, free speech. Kind of group that all into one, because it's all kind of on the same line.
Look, I used to make the statement that I could be to the left on issues, and the biggest thing I'm talking about is political correctness. You know, in the 90s, Bill Maher had a show called Politically Incorrect, and he's a big liberal. He's considered a big left-wing guy. But the whole point was that you could talk about anything, you could say anything, and conservative people used to say, oh, we need to censor this and censor that because it's profane, or they're saying this or they're saying that. Now it's the left that's saying, well, this is hate speech, and that's homophobic, and that's racist, and that's sexist, and can't say this word. They're at the point in the state of Washington, I believe, where they were saying you can't use in schools like penmanship, the word, because it's sexist, or fisherman, or, you know, fireman, has to be firefighter, and, you know, good handwriting or whatever. So we're getting so far away that you can't even have a conversation without apologizing after because you might have offended someone. Yeah. And that goes right in with they're using that as a way to have censorship, to where you say something online and somebody gets upset about it and reports it and they take down the post. Or some doctors stand out in a lab coat in front of the U.S. Capitol and talk about which drugs could help with COVID, and they say YouTube has to remove that because these doctors aren't our doctors and they're somebody else. Right. So you're hiding information from people, and if you really want to protect people from dangerous ideas, number one, you put out the good ideas to counter those bad ideas and then show them why they're wrong. But number two, you also let people see how extreme they are and don't push them underground. So there's a saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that's absolutely true. That if there are these, you know, hateful white supremacist groups that they're talking about, let them go march, let them stand out there, let them get a permit, and then they're on national news, you see everybody's face, you know who they are, and then people decide, do they want to live near these people, do they want to work with them, and see who they are. But if you say, oh, we won't give you guys a permit, we won't let you speak here, you're not allowed to protest, you're hateful, that's hate speech. Well, now they're doing it online in these communities under anonymous handles, and, you know, we don't know who's who and who's anywhere. So let it come to the top and let people see who they're living with. And but now the censorship is out of control. It's swinging the elections. It's controlling information. You know, propaganda. It's basically state-run media that you watch all the news channels and they're all using the same word that day, saying like equity or, you know, insurrection when it was January 6th. It's like they all have a meeting in the morning and say, this is the word today we're all going to use. And then it comes out. And if nobody's saying that word, we take that channel down and censor them because they're not following the script. Right. You know, and that's really dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. So up until a couple of years ago, this wasn't even a thing, but lockdowns and mandates.
I'm scared how many people did comply with that because it was basically a test run for other things. Like, I don't believe in forced lockdowns. I don't believe in vaccine mandates, mask mandates. I believe people have the choice to get a vaccine, to wear a mask, to stay home as long as they want. You know, if you feel safe there, that's your business. You're an American, you know. But once you start telling other people, I don't want you to leave your house because I don't feel safe, that's the whole mentality that the left has. Like, I'll take away your rights so I can feel better. I won't let you say words because I don't like how they make me feel. That's where the problem lies. So with this, what scared me is with the vaccines, people were so willing to every few months get told, well, it's time for your booster, it's time for your booster. And I think it's scary that people would basically line up like cattle somewhere every couple months and take an injection that the government told them is going to help them out, you know, which maybe someday it's not. Yeah. And you sound crazy, right? They'll say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. You're saying the government's going to poison, or what are you trying to say? Well, yeah, right, you don't know. And anybody who says you should just blindly trust the government, especially when it comes to giving you injections. I mean, a perfect example is when my wife was pregnant, they wanted her to take the COVID vaccine while she was pregnant. And I said, yeah, ask them how that's safe. And they said it's 100% safe. And I said, how can they make that statement? I said, ask them if they've tested it. And they said, oh, that would be unethical to test a vaccine on a pregnant woman. I said, so nobody's ever tested this, but you're saying it's 100% safe. We know that's a lie then. It's impossible because you don't know. But you want to give it to my wife and unborn child at the time and say it's safe, don't worry about it. So why? And those are the same people that telling me that it's safe for me, and this is safe, and take it every couple months, and it doesn't do anything wrong, and there's no real side effects, and it's more good than harm, and I don't trust them, you know. And not saying nobody should get it, but I didn't, and I won't. We don't know. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So the last one that we're going to cover is going to be the tax structure and the topics of whether raising taxes, lowering taxes, or streamlining government is really going to be the solution to keep things moving without just wasteful spending.
Well, the government has a way, and they really do a great job at this, but it's a terrible thing, is that they create a problem and then say they have the solution to fix it, the problem that they created, you know. It's like someone knocks over your drink and then says, I'll clean it up for you, and wants you to tell them, wow, great job, like, you know, you made this mess. So they go and spend every year. You know, my grandfather tells me he only has a 3rd grade education, but he knows everything he needs to know about economics. Just don't spend more than you make, and you'll be okay. And the government every year, they say, oh, we have $4 trillion, and we have a budget, we'd like to spend $5 trillion. And then we're another trillion in debt, and another trillion, to now it's over $30 trillion in debt. So what they say is, after they spent too much money that we didn't have, you know what we got to do to fix all this? Raise taxes. Then we'll start cutting in, we'll pay down some of that debt. When if they just didn't spend money we didn't have, we wouldn't need to raise taxes. But the reason they're spending money we don't have is because they're creating programs we don't need. And those programs are things like this Green New Deal, or we're going to give $500 million to this solar factory, or we're going to study bear DNA in Yellowstone to see why there's less brown bears, or whatever it is. And there's people starving, and there's people that can't find a job, or there's people getting laid off because the factory got moved over to China, and you're studying crickets and bears and, you know, giving all these grants to this stuff. It's insanity. And the private sector always beats the government. So anything the government can do, the private sector can do better. So all these, like I said, the Department of Education shouldn't be there. Free up that money, you know. But the people will always spend their money better than the government will. So it's better off in their own pockets. And if you look back until 1913, we didn't even have an income tax. So the country existed longer till that point than it has now. The majority of its history without anyone paying any income tax before the Federal Reserve even existed. And since that's happened, it's gone up. It used to be something to the effect of you would pay 1% if you made over, say, $400,000 or $500,000 in today's dollars back then. So only if someone making over $500,000 would pay like 1%. Now you make over $200,000 or $300,000, you end up paying 40 or 50 between state and federal. It was supposed to be this tiny little thing, and it's because the government was so small, you didn't need that. But like I said, they create the problem. They make government into this massive thing. They just did it again. We need 87,000 more IRS agents. Well, who's going to pay for that? Oh, we are. So let's increase taxes. So the solution is cut down the size of government, only give the people the departments they absolutely need, like the military, you know, and a few other departments, cut back on everything else, and then you wouldn't need all this revenue. And there's other ways. There's flat taxes, there's sales tax, there's other ways, but I think the progressive income tax system as it is now isn't the way, and it's clearly not working, and the middle class almost doesn't exist. We're getting poorer, and the way they're printing so much money and running us into debt, that's the inflation problem. And I think that's the last issue that really ties into all this, is that by